You've probably seen the headlines lately, right? All this talk about rising tensions on Egypt's eastern border. There are some really conflicting stories floating around about military buildups and political pressure. So, what is really going on? Let's try and sort through the noise together and get to the bottom of it.
Okay, so that's the big question, isn't it? It sounds simple, but the answer, well, it's complicated. Are we looking at a serious threat to a peace treaty that's been in place for decades? Or is this all just standard national security stuff that's being spun for political reasons? That's exactly what we're going to unpack here. So here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to break it down in a pretty straightforward way. Claim versus rebuttal. We'll kick things off with Cairo's official message. Then we'll dive into the two big points of friction, the military presence and a natural gas deal. And finally, we'll explore the alleged political motives that Egyptian sources say are driving all of this. All right, first up, before we get into the weeds of all the claims and counterclaims, it is absolutely crucial to understand where Egypt is coming from. Cairo has been putting out a very, very firm and clear message about its national sovereignty. And this right here, this is the core of it. The official line from Egypt is that its border security is a matter of national sovereignty. It's non-negotiable, and it's totally separate from any political deal-making or outside pressure. This one statement really sets the stage for everything else we're about to discuss. So let's get to the first major claim that's been making headlines. There have been reports, especially one from Axios, that have detailed some serious Israeli concerns about a pretty significant Egyptian military buildup in the Sinai Peninsula. Now, according to the Israeli officials in that report, the worry isn't just about the number of troops. They're pointing to the construction of what they're calling offensive infrastructure, and they claim it violates the 1979 peace treaty. It's even been reported that Israel actually asked the U.S. to step in and put some pressure on Cairo. Okay, so those are some serious allegations. How does Egypt respond? Well, their rebuttal is incredibly direct, and it all comes down to one thing: national security. This quote from Dia Rashwan, who's the head of Egypt's State Information Service, really cuts right to the heart of their argument. He's saying, look, any military we have in the Sinai is there for one reason: Egyptian security. And who decides what those needs are? Egypt and Egypt alone. Now, here's where Egypt's counterpoint gets really interesting. They point out that there are official systems already in place, things like joint military committees and international observer forces that are on the ground specifically to handle these kinds of issues. So their argument is pretty simple. If this was a real breach of the treaty, why hasn't Israel filed an official complaint through the proper channels? This leads them to believe these accusations are just political noise, not a genuine military concern. So it really boils down to this stark contrast. On one side, you've got the claim of a major treaty violation, and on the other are rebuttals saying, hey, this is a transparent internal security matter, and by the way, the folks complaining aren't even using the official channels to do it. Now, the second big point of contention shifts us away from the military and into the world of economics. Specifically, we're talking about a natural gas deal between the two countries. So the claim, as it's being reported in Israeli media, is that this gas deal is a lot more than just a business transaction. It's being seen as a point of leverage, a tool that could be used to influence Egyptian policy and how they make decisions. Unsurprisingly, Egypt sees this completely differently. They're framing the gas deal not as some big political tool, but as a pretty simple business arrangement that's been, in their view, blown way out of proportion. And here is the key number they use to back that up. Egyptian officials say that the gas they get from Israel makes up less than 14% of their total gas consumption. The message there is pretty clear. How can something that small be considered critical leverage? They argue it just isn't, especially when they have other alternatives. So Egypt basically breaks down their argument like this. First, this is a deal between private companies, not a state-to-state agreement. Second, like we just saw, it's not a critical supply. And third, they argue that their political positions haven't budged an inch, which they see as proof that this so-called economic pressure just isn't working. So once again, you can see two totally opposing stories. One side presents this deal as a powerful political lever. The other just shrugs it off as a routine commercial agreement that has very little, if any, political influence. And that brings us to the final part of this whole story, and honestly, it might be the most fascinating: the why. According to Egyptian officials, the real motive behind all these claims isn't about genuine security or economic worries at all. They say it's about domestic Israeli politics. Now, to really get their argument, you have to understand this key political idea they keep pointing to, Surat al-Nasr, which translates to the image of victory.
It's this idea of manufacturing the perception of a win for your people back home, especially when a real, clear-cut victory is proving hard to find.
So, according to Dr. Rashwan, here's how the narrative goes. Prime Minister Netanyahu promised his country an absolute victory in Gaza, but so far he hasn't been able to deliver on that. The argument, then, is that he needs to create a different kind of victory. By framing these talks as Israel successfully pressuring and controlling a huge regional power like Egypt, it creates a political win that can be presented back home to the Israeli public.
This final quote really just powerfully sums up the entire Egyptian perspective. The argument here is that Egypt's political positions are deeply, deeply rooted in its own history and its geopolitical identity. And to suggest that they could be swayed by some minor economic deal, well, that shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the country itself.
And all of this leaves us with a really crucial question, doesn't it? In these moments of intense international tension, where national security and domestic politics crash into each other, that line between what's fact and what's narrative can get incredibly blurry. And the challenge for all of us trying to follow the news is figuring out how to see through that fog.